Hello and welcome to Read Brave, a comics podcast from the Graphomania Podcast Network. I'm Vinton and it's been a long while since I've talked to all of you. I went on vacation this summer and was supposed to come back a month later, and then I got sick, and then I had trouble finding a co-host, and then I got sick again, and then a water heater exploded. No, it didn't explode, but it did break and spill everywhere and almost ruined some of my comics, so that was fun. And then I got sick again and decided I'm going to record anyways, so I have a slightly sick voice. So before we get started, I have just a few notes on housekeeping for the podcast, which is that I think we're going to be moving back to every other week. And I'm going to be playing around with some different ideas because I've had a hard time finding co-hosts, finding segments. I do want to keep the podcast going, but it might be slightly different. So I'm open to accepting any ideas that any of you might have on that particular topic. So with that being said, it's now time for me to introduce my lovely co-host. Today on the show, we have, once again, Emily Savidge.
Hey.
The Savage, Emily Savidge. I'm just going to make jokes about your name every time you come on about how savage you are.
My friends were very impressed with the name of the last episode.
It's a fun name. Savage and Bane.
We could team up.
Yeah, we could be supervillains, probably. Probably not superheroes. I can't imagine superheroes being called Savage and Bane. Maybe in a Vertigo series? I don't know. That being said, Emily, what have you been reading lately?
So much. So I've been picking up issues every week from my comic book store and just throwing them down on the coffee table, thinking I was going to get to them at some point. And that some point was last weekend, where I got to probably 4 or 5 weeks of issues.
Yeah.
So it was
remember there were times in my life where I was picking up comics from the comic book store, not having time to read them, and I was just filling up a long box of comics to be read. It was sad, actually. I don't think I ever got to reading half of the comics that were in that box. I think I just gave up at some point and moved on.
It's always better to have things to be read than to run out of things to read.
That's true.
So, yeah, I spent last Saturday reading most of them. I think I sat down for a few hours.
Nice.
I was going through Goodreads, marking them off as I was reading, and you were marking off some stuff there too. So I was like, oh, it's one of those Saturdays.
Yep. We read almost the same comics.
Yeah. Speaking of, I read the last couple issues of Hawkeye and Jessica Jones and Invincible Iron Man, America, Hulk, Champions, Miss Marvel, Defenders. Read the first couple of issues of Luke Cage. Read all 3 issues of the Spectacular Spider-Man
Zdarsky?
Comic that you mentioned last time.
Are you digging it?
I really like it.
Yeah, I'm really liking it too.
Yeah, it seemed, because I jumped into some Amazing Spider-Man at some point, and I was just like, he's super rich and like has a bodyguard.
It'd be a hard place to jump into. I enjoy Amazing Spider-Man, but I would not recommend Amazing Spider-Man to people that aren't already fans of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, oh, he's old and smart and really rich or something.
That's the gist of it.
Yeah, and then Aunt May married J. Jonah Jameson, and I was really confused.
Yeah, very confused.
And I stepped back from that series. I read the Generations Hawkeye, the comic book store that I go to. They pulled it for me and asked if I wanted it, and I said, sure. Yeah. I love both Hawkeyes.
I really like that one. I think Kelly Thompson is doing a really good job with Hawkeye, and especially on this Generations, it was a really cool thing where she mixed the styles of the classic comics and the new. When Clint is thinking, it's all in thought bubbles, like in the old comics. He's just like thinking all these things in thought bubbles. But when Kate is thinking, it's in the caption boxes, like you see more often in modern comics.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that when I was reading it, and I saw that you put that on Goodreads in your thing, and I was like, what? And I went back and I was like, oh, yeah, it's just, I guess, because I'm used to reading stuff from all different times right now, that it doesn't even faze me. But yeah, I really like that, and I don't know how long that series is supposed to be. But
the Generations,
yeah,
they're just doing one-offs for each one.
Okay.
They explained kind of why they're doing it at the end of Secret Empire.
Okay.
Because Secret Empire was basically resolved with a cosmic cube, but the cosmic cube is also a sentient child called Kobik. But Kobik decided to fix everything. They fixed everything, but gave as a gift to all the heroes that they would basically meet their legacy title people and be able to learn a lesson from them in the past. So Kobik kind of sent them all back to learn a lesson and to help them out.
Probably should have read the paraphernalia that this comic book store gave to me the month before.
I think they mostly treat it as a mystery, but they start briefly mentioning it after they released that last issue of Secret Empire, which kind of explained it. So
yeah, I didn't read that. Weird. So I was considering probably reading the Iron Man one too.
Yeah, that one is really, really good. I want to say it spoils, but the stuff that it spoils, quote unquote, probably won't even happen for like 5 to 10 years. But basically, she goes into the future and learns stuff about herself from the future, but they're
Oh,
trying
cool.
to be vague with her about it because she's from the past. They
Yeah.
don't want to mess things up. It's kind of weird, but it's also very exciting because they make it sound like she's going to be a big deal in the Marvel universe, which
Oh,
means that
that's
the company
awesome.
has big plans for her. So I'm really excited
Yeah,
about that.
I love her, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. And then what else did I read? Oh, I read the U.S. Avengers, the first 5 issues,
Right.
and I have the rest of the ones that are out so far. I just haven't gotten to them yet. And I read Unstoppable Wasp issue 1 finally.
Yeah. Man, Unstoppable Wasp, such a good series. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
You mentioned U.S. Avengers. That's a series that I've really enjoyed. I recently just went back and read all of it because I'd only read the first few issues, and I think that's why you picked it up is because I mentioned.
You mentioned it. You
Yeah.
mentioned something about Danielle Cage
Yep.
becoming Captain America, and I
Right.
said, I am there.
Yeah, there's a lot of cartoony weird stuff in the beginning of that series, but as it goes on, it really finds itself, and I really enjoyed what it's done up to this point. And it was actually Al Ewing who was also working on Ultimates 2, which was another comic that I really enjoyed recently. It's more of a cosmic comic in the Marvel universe that deals with a lot of the cosmic characters that really no one's talked about since the 70s when everyone was writing comics on drugs. So a lot of the cool stuff there. I did a really good job of reintroducing those characters. That's where we get they made Galactus the life bringer instead of the world eater. And so he brings life back to everything and he's all gold and he's real cool looking. It's pretty fantastic story. It's a great way to get into the deepest pool of Marvel cosmic that you can, but they do a good job of also explaining it to you so you don't feel like you're drowning.
And that would be good because I know almost nothing about cosmic
Yeah.
Marvel people.
Yeah, Old Guardians is a good, not old, I shouldn't say, because like Guardians of the Galaxy from like 10 years ago is a good place to jump into Cosmic Marvel, but not old because I don't recommend the old Guardians before the team that we see in the movies now. I have nothing against them. I just not for them.
I didn't know what Guardians of the Galaxy was until I saw the preview for the first movie in theaters a couple years ago, and I said, huh? So
You also mentioned you've been reading Jessica Jones. That is a comic that I still have not picked up, and I really need to because I really like what Bendis is doing. I really like what he did with the original run, and I like what he's doing on some of the other things now. And surely it has to be great.
it's really good. I was extremely confused when I read the first couple issues, and then I realized that was the point.
Oh,
Apparently,
okay.
I thought I missed something. I thought I needed some sort of bridge from
Yeah.
when we last saw her to here, but no, everyone was confused. Apparently, it's really good. I love the covers for the
Yeah.
Jessica Jones, and
Yeah, I
and
don't
I
know
think
who's
going back
doing
to
those.
Alias, I looked at the name when I was reading the last one because every time I just kind of stare at them. It's like the most beautiful watercolor. She looks like she's in pain, like anguish.
Yeah. So yeah, that is actually David Mack who did those covers, and I wanted to talk about him here in a moment too because his art is just fantastic. He does really cool paintings and he does really cool collages. They have them on the inside of some of the Jessica Jones comics that you can see like there's Scotch tape and he puts these triangles everywhere, some little stamps, different things like that. He does this really cool thing where he'll like paint panels and then he'll like sketch over those and he'll put like weird typography stuff and then he'll just scan in some like fabric or leaves or tape or other things. It's really cool way to do comic art.
Yeah, Jessica Jones. Well, the Alias run of Jessica Jones is the first comic that I picked up once I decided this was going to be a thing that happened last year, and I was just like, "Oh, comic books are looking a lot cooler on the inside than I thought they did." But yeah, that's all him apparently.
Yeah, he does a fantastic job. So you mentioned also that you've been reading The Defenders by Bendis, and this has been an amazing run of comics. It's the first time that we've actually seen the Defenders as they are presented in the Netflix show in the comics as a team. So that's been really interesting, and I actually liked it better than the show. But I did like the show, all right. Did you watch the show?
Oh yeah, I watched the first half the night that it was released, and then the next half the next morning. Actually, before I came to Oklahoma City, I
Right.
forget why.
Yeah, they kind of forced you to watch Iron Fist season 2 a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't care for that very much, but I'm glad that I watched Iron Fist in the few days before Defenders came out. I forced myself to sit down at the very last minute and watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really good. I actually really liked it. There were, of course, we've talked previously about how Jessica Jones was underused slightly. I mean, really, the plot being the hand, Luke and Jessica aren't going to be used very much, but Luke and Jessica are your two favorite parts
Oh
of that.
yeah,
So,
they're my favorite. They're my OTP. I love them in the shows, I guess at this point, and
yeah,
in their individual series. I've read a lot more Jessica Jones. Actually, no, I've read a fair bit of both, but Luke Cage has had so many series that it's kind of
Right.
snippets here and there.
yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely love the show. I think if they do a second season, I don't know if they've announced for sure if they are or not, but I hope
Yeah,
they do
but they
something a
have.
little bit more, I guess, not supernatural, the hand-ish.
Yeah, my hopes is that not that they do or don't do, I guess, a Defenders season 2, but that they do kind of what Captain America did after the Avengers having like Civil War, that all the shows then become team ups. So like Luke Cage has a lot of the characters showing up in his show, and then Jessica has a lot of characters showing up in her show, and so they're all, now that they've all joined up, they should just be bouncing back and forth between each other's shows. That would be my ideal.
Yeah, and not suddenly forget that they know other
Right.
superpowered people, which is what was happening in the big movies. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, Thor doesn't remember, or doesn't have anyone else to turn to, and it's just like, okay, well, they didn't have the budget for that.
Right. Yeah, it took them a while to build up to where they started doing a lot of crossovers in the movies, which now we're at that point. So
Yeah, I don't think
it's
there's
nice
any
that
way around it.
Yeah, there's probably not going to be many Marvel movies that don't have some kind of crossover with other Marvel movies at this point.
It's wonderful.
It is very wonderful. But this comic is really good. This Bendis Defenders run. It was you that recommended it to me, I think, last time you were on the show, and I read, I think it's the first 5 issues are out now. And it's telling a really fantastic story. I expected it to be just some kind of promotional thing for the show to get people into it. It wasn't going to be like a full-hearted try on making a good Defenders comic, but it's great. I really like it. It's one of my favorite things I'm reading right now.
Yeah, it's really good, and it has nothing to do with the show other than the fact that it's the same 4 people.
Right.
They have different bad guys. They don't seem to know who Daredevil is in this. They think his name's Gary, which I laugh.
Really like that.
I was laughing when I was reading that earlier today. But yeah, it's really cool, and I think just from watching all the different TV shows and movies and reading comics, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, okay, so I actually know who that guy is. When all of a sudden they bring in Kingpin or whatever.
Right.
Although I guess they kept mentioning Kingpin in the most recent Defenders, but it wasn't Fisk. He was in the Spectacular Spider-Man that I was just reading.
Yeah.
Very confusing when you're reading everything and all the characters and names are coming up. But yeah, it was a bit of a surprise to at the end of the last Defenders.
Yeah, I'm just now remembering. Was it Defenders? Yeah, it was Defenders. They actually had some crossover with Bendis's run on Miles Morales' Spider-Man, because you see in Spider-Man there's a whole scenario that plays out, and then Defenders started coming out, and a few issues later they go back to that same scene and they show it from a different perspective, but you realize that he's in that same club, and this scene that you saw in Spider-Man is now happening in Defenders, but you're seeing it from a different side of the club. And I was like, that's exactly what I want from a writer who's working on 2 different comics in the same universe.
That's what I would want too. I haven't read any of Miles Morales yet. I own a bunch of them.
Yeah, I should show you which issue it is that happens in, because it'd be really fantastic to read both of them together.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's what you want. You want things told from different points of view, but the same thing. That's so cool.
Right. It was really awesome. Speaking of Bendis doing a really good job here, this is something, after watching Defenders show and reading the Defenders comic, it made me really miss Daredevil. And I haven't really read almost any Daredevil since high school. And he was my favorite character up until that point. But I jumped off right at the point that Bendis started writing him. I didn't even read anything that Bendis wrote of it, which I think it was just because of schoolwork and things like that. And I was in a band at the time touring and doing stuff like that. So I didn't have much time for comics at that point in my life, so I kind of jumped off of a lot of things, but I jumped off of Daredevil specifically, and I never did go back. And so I was looking into it, and I was like, well, Bendis did this long run on Daredevil. I should check some of that out. So I went back to, I think it's issue 16, and I think it's 16 to 21. Bendis actually did a series with a story with David Mack, and did a Daredevil story that's barely about Daredevil. He just shows up just a little bit. He's like tangentially involved. It's about a little kid whose dad is a villain. And actually it's Ben Urich, the reporter, is trying to investigate what happened to his dad and what happened to him, because the boy is like not speaking, and he's being kind of delirious, like telling these superhero stories that don't make any sense, but that's the only way he'll communicate. But it's beautifully told, because Mac does, like I mentioned, these collages, and he just scans in all sorts of cool stuff, does these elaborate paintings. And it really drew me in. I actually had to go buy a physical copy of it on Amazon, because I was like, I have to own a physical copy of this. I can let people borrow. Digital is not enough. So I got that physical copy so I can just like lend it out to people. Like, you have to look at the beautiful artwork in this. And it's a really cool story, because it barely does touch on Daredevil. He just kind of shows up here and there. But it's really emotional too. Because, I mean, you got a little kid involved, it's going to get emotional.
Yeah. But
Bendis does such a good job writing Daredevil. I have now read up to issue 71, I think, and that's been in like 2 weeks. So that's a lot of comics I've caught up on for Daredevil, but I have a lot more to go, because I think I was going to guess how many I was behind, but I think it's like close to 200 that I was behind
Oh my
to
goodness.
catch up to current day. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it all the way through before I just like have to start reading something else. But so far, I'm really loving it. Like it's such an amazing run. This is the early 2000s Bendis Daredevil. And in this run, they, right near the beginning, basically Murdoch is exposed as Daredevil. And it comes out in tabloids. So he's trying to fight that, pretend that he's not. He's constantly surrounded by press. There's FBI following him everywhere. Kingpin is taken out supposedly by one of his underlings. That tries to kill him, and everyone thinks he's dead, but he does end up coming back. But when he does come back, Matt Murdock is so furious at everything that's been going on. He's been like having a heck of a time because all of his villains are showing up trying to kill Matt Murdock because they think Matt Murdock's Daredevil, which he is, but he doesn't want anybody to know that. That when Kingpin shows back up, he's had it. He goes and he beats the crap out of Kingpin, drags him in front of a bunch of crime people, and says, "I'm now your Kingpin. You want someone to be in charge of the streets? I'm in charge of the streets. Don't let me catch you doing anything wrong on my streets because I will kill you. Look what I did to him. And if I can do this to him, then guess what I can do to you." And it was like really intense. Also, it's really interesting because Iron Fist and Luke Cage and Doctor Strange and Peter Parker all know, Peter Parker Spider-Man, I should say, just in case you don't know. I think everybody knows that. All know who Matt Murdock is Daredevil. So they're all trying to like counsel him through this. And they're like, "You're making some bad decisions. You can't be taking these, this Kingpin position. You're just pushing all the crime over to our neighborhoods and you need to calm down." And they're also trying to help him with his identity thing. But I'd really like to know what happens because sometime between now and then, they forgot he was Daredevil somehow through some kind of cosmic something. Because as we mentioned in Defenders, they're calling him Gary because they don't know who he is. Which that does happen. People found out that I think just a few years after that, and during the original Civil War, found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. And then, of course, he made a deal with Mephisto, Brand New Day. Everyone forgot that he was Spider-Man.
Okay, that explains that. I saw
He basically
him.
made a deal with the devil to end his marriage in exchange for bringing Aunt May back and everyone forgetting that he was Peter Parker so it would keep everyone he loves safe.
Huh.
But Mephisto's part of the deal was, you will not be married to Mary Jane anymore.
Bummer.
Even though he had a really happy, nice marriage. All throughout this run of Daredevil, he keeps mentioning that when he shows up. He's like, "I had a really hot wife to get back to. I'll see you guys."
Oh.
And they're like, "Does he really have a hot wife?" Oh. It's pretty funny. But I highly recommend this run of Daredevil, especially that very first story, which is called Wake Up with Bendis and David Mack. It's fantastic.
Okay, I have a confession. I did not know anything about Daredevil until the Ben Affleck movie came out back in the day.
Oh,
I've never seen the movie, but then I totally just, it disappeared from my knowledge. And then the next thing I heard about Daredevil was when the TV show came out.
Yeah.
I never really read, I never read comics when I was little. And I only knew about the big ones, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. That's about it.
I don't know if I know how I got into Daredevil. I mean, I think I've mentioned on the show plenty of times that I got into comics reading old 70s X-Men and Spider-Man from my friend's dad's long boxes. And he must have had some Daredevil in there, or maybe it was just crossover, but somehow I got really into Daredevil and I collected almost everything I could find between issues, I think like 15 and 100 of the original run. And I just like devoured those things. And back then, in some of those older comics, Daredevil and Black Widow are together. And I think that they're my comic OTP. That actually brings me to the one complaint I have about Bendis's run is that the artist who's working on it at that time, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. I could look it up. I'm not going to. Just because this is actually a negative comment. There's a short story they do in there. I think it's like 4 or 5 issues where Black Widow comes back as a main part, and it looks like all of his drawings of Black Widow are just traced porn or something. Because every time she's just standing with like her boobs like leaning out, her butt sticking out. It's like, what are you doing? Why would you draw Black Widow this way? I mean, I know why you do it this way, but it was awful. It made me feel gross reading the comics. I was like, I don't want to look at her standing that way. Why is she standing that way? Who stands that way? It was really unnecessary and really a product of its time that did not age very well.
Yeah, Black Widow's too badass for that.
Yeah, no. And you don't see that as much nowadays. I mean, of course, there was a bunch of controversy when it happened with Spider-Woman, cover of Spider-Woman. I don't know if you heard about that controversy. The way she was posed on the cover was very graphic and traced from pornography. I think that was the actual thing. And people were like, that was not okay. But I thought it was funny because people got so angry about that. But that same exact pose that Spider-Woman's in on that cover was definitely used in this comic like 10 years before.
Oh, goodness.
For Black Widow. And people weren't complaining. I guess it was just more prevalent then. So it just kind of shows that we have done a better job at clearing some of that out and being like, yeah, let's not draw women that way because it's unnecessary.
Yeah, the only Spider-Woman that I've read so far is the one where she's on the cover and she's super pregnant.
Yeah,
so
that one's awesome.
yeah, I actually finally finished that since the last episode. Took a while.
All right, well, that's all I got. We got anything else?
Nope.
All right, let's move on to our segment. This episode, we have once again Ramón Pérez for a People's History of Comics. We recorded this way back in June when we did his original interview. And as a bonus, when we first talked to him in March, he actually answered these questions for us in a written form in an email. And they're slightly different than the answers he came up with live on the show. So if you want to check out those written answers, head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Graphocast, GRAPHOCAST, and I'll put that up there for free for anyone to look at, not just the patrons. In the meantime, enjoy this wonderful interview with the brilliant Ramón Pérez. So we're here today with award-winning comics creator Ramón Pérez, artist and co-author on the just finished Nova series for Marvel, and artist on the upcoming Spider-Man Generations title, The Spiders. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
How you doing?
So we'll open with a typical question and hopefully get more original from there. First of all, how did you get into making comics?
I mean, it's been, I guess, like, would you mean professionally or would you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sure.
Professionally just seemed like a natural journey. I was doing it for myself quite often when I was younger. I was doing, in grade school, I did kind of my own Sunday Funny comic strips with my own characters. And then in high school, I did which kind of into an online comic years later that I did. And just professionally seemed like a natural progression way to go. I did some graphic novels for some indie publishers, game publishers. Would try to poke my head into the Marvel and DC world from time to time, to no avail for the most part. I was either too cartoony for Marvel or not well established enough too cartoony enough for DC, but not well established enough for Marvel. So, despite having a few bites here and there, it wasn't until I did Tale of Sand, where a company kind of took a chance on me with that project and allowed me kind of just free reign to do whatever I wanted. And that with the Eisner's one from that book, it just kind of opened up a lot of doors for me on the professional front. Because prior to that, I would always balance out my work with a lot of advertising work, graphic design, children's books, a wide variety of stuff. I've been freelancing pretty much my entire career.
Sure.
So there was always an avenue to produce art to make a living, kind of thing.
Yeah. Actually, it was Jim Henson's Tale of Sand that introduced me to your work. I've always been a huge Jim Henson fan, and when I heard that was coming out, I pre-ordered it and got a hold of it as quick as possible. Nice. So that's when I really found out who you were as an artist. And then, of course, I'm a big Marvel fanboy, so then you started doing a lot with Marvel in more recent years, and I really fell in love with all of that stuff: Wolverine, the X-Men, the Spider-Man work, and then this latest Nova series. So it seems like you do a lot of work with Marvel. How did you fall into, I mean, you kind of mentioned that they just saw your Eisner and the work you did on Tale of Sand, but what was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, my first job for, actually right after Tale of Sand was actually John Carter, Gods of Mars for Marvel. And that was done through Son Amanat, who was kind of the editing all the kind of book-related fiction at the time, and she's moved on through the hierarchy of Marvel since, but at the time she was in need of an artist to kind of come in and take care of this adaptation for it. And because of the source material, she was also friends with my editor on Tale of Sand, so he kind of introduced to her, and it kind of just felt like a natural next step. A very high profile book, but it was a fun book in the sense that I knew the source material, I liked it. I was given free reign to kind of adapt in the Marvel style, along with Sam Humphries, who was doing the kind of written adaptation of it. And then basically after that, by the time that series was kind of wrapping up, the Eisners came out, and I was awarded the Eisners and stuff like that. So by the time that was kind of wrapping up, Marvel kind of being their stable already, some of the editors reached out from Niccolo in particular, reached out and wanted to work on the X book, and which was a flattering offer because I was a big fan of the series. And yeah, it kind of just naturally went from there. I've been quite lucky since then, working on pretty much a lot of their higher profile characters. Usually I do like a shorter run. I'm not a long haul kind of artist. I don't like doing 2 years on a book.
Sure.
It's just not my. I mean, Hawkeye was the longest run I've ever done, and that was 11 issues. If it's my own series, that's a different story. I'm more invested in it. So, right. But I find with some of these other, like when you're on the ride with a company, they dictate where the book goes. You really can, poke and prod and push in certain directions, but at the end of the day, it's their character. So, being probably someone who created a lot of my own content before Marvel, it's something I prefer to have more control on where things go, and it just allows me to have more fun that way and invest myself a little bit more. So, which was actually what led to my progression to get onto Nova. Me talking to Marvel, saying, "Listen, I want to do something that I'm more invested in longer," and they're relaunching Nova, and I said I want to be in on plotting and writing, and so they paired me up with Jeff Loveness.
Yeah,
we hit it off nicely. We had similar ideas about the character. We came from different backgrounds, storytelling wise, so that was kind of a nice mashup in that regard. And so, unfortunately, the series got cut short. We had plotted out quite further, but c'est la vie.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, was if you had actually plotted out further, if you had planned that ending. So I knew it had gotten canceled, but I didn't know how much previous notice to that you had gotten. So
yeah, the book did get canceled a lot sooner, or ended a lot sooner than we had anticipated. We had plotted out much further, larger story arcs with the character. We did end the issue where it was like that, where we ended was actually an original arc, ending of an arc. Yeah. We just kind of tailored the last few pages to better fit a series end, if you will, rather than an arc end kind of thing. So, which is unfortunate, but at least we were able to actually tell at least a complete story and bring back Rich and have the two characters kind of meet and kind of set the standard for their relationship at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved this newer Nova series. I got back into comics just before the Annihilation stuff happened at Marvel, and that stuff really pulled me back into Marvel especially, and it still means a lot to me today, and Richard Rider was one of my favorites. Seeing him return was just great, and I really loved the dialogue with him and the younger heroes early on in the series as a commentary to just how much the Marvel Universe has changed in the past decade.
Yeah, definitely, yeah, that was Jeff's flair coming through. Yeah, it was really, he did it quite well.
That's one of the things I was wanting to ask was, how did the writing break down there, the partnership between you and Loveness? Did one of you do more story and more scripting, or did you just take different parts of the story?
It actually varied per issue. It was very organic. We both came in on the plot, and we both plotted things out. With the first issue, I think I wrote about 5 pages or 4 pages, I can't recall exactly, and he took the heavy lifting on the first issue. But then the second issue, I think, was an even split scripting wise. Third issue, we did Marvel style, where I drew out the whole thing and he scripted afterwards. So it kind of varied, whatever played to the strength of each issue kind of thing, it really just went to, we let the story dictate. The last couple of issues were more his, just because I had to step away. We had Scott Hepburn filling in, so I came in on the plot. But then I had to step away to finish up a graphic novel I was doing. So he did the heavy lifting on the actual scripting in those ones. So, it pushed and pulled basically as the story needed, as what characters we spotlighted, what the situations were, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of partnerships, this isn't so much as a question as just me kind of fanning out a little bit. The art in this book was phenomenal, and your art with Ian Herring's colors just popped so well for me. I really want to see like more from that. This is one of my biggest disappointments, this thing that the series was ending. I was like, oh, I want more of them working together.
Oh, I mean, Ian and I often work together. He colored me partially on. Well, actually, no, he was the predominant colorist on Tale of Sand.
Right.
And he worked with me on Spider-Man Learning to Crawl. And did he work on the other one? He was with me on Hawkeye as well. So we worked together quite a bit.
Yeah.
He's in my studio, the Raid Studio up here in Toronto. And
That's
he
right.
literally like sits like 10 feet over from me. So we have a few we have a few team ups happening every so often, because it's nice to actually look over each other's shoulders and kind of go in there and see the colors firsthand. And Ian's great. He's open to my suggestions and kind of vision. So I usually tend to come in with an idea of what I want on a series, and obviously he brings his strengths as well. We kind of like mash up our idea and kind of create what we create. So I especially like to try to create a different visual voice for each series, and he's open to playing in that regard, which is great.
So you mentioned there that you work with the group known as Raid Studios.
Yep.
I really love that whole group. I watched that short documentary that you guys put out a while back. It's really
nice.
Inspiring. Can you tell our listeners just a little bit about that collective?
Yeah, sure. It's the Royal Academy of Illustration Design, which was started back in 2003 by Chip Zdarsky, Cameron Stewart, and a few other artists. And I came in about 2003. There was about 4 artists then. I replaced one of the Kagan McLeod, who Chip Zdarsky did Captara with. I kind of replaced him. He was moving out due to, family, having a family, basically. He just got married, had a kid on the way, had bought a house, so he felt he couldn't afford the separation of the time at the studio. So I kind of came in, and over the years, all the original members have left, and we've had great new members come in who've stayed permanently with us, like Francis Manopal, Marcus Toast, Scott Helper, Kalman Androsovsky, Nimit Malavia. We have great new up-and-comers like Irma Navilla, Gabe Sapienza, Ian Herring, like as I mentioned, Tonchi Zonjic, when he moved over to Canada from Croatia, joined our studio as well. Writer Anthony Falcone, who does a lot of indie books as well. And then we've had some bigger names like Ken Lashley and Paul Ravoche over the years, Kerry Nord, Carl Kerschel. So it's been a really great kind of hub for artists to come through. Some stay longer, some stay a little bit less. But it's a great space. We're about 14 strong now. And we it's just a nice little clubhouse we all go to create. And as the studio has grown, our objectives have changed as well. We're slowly moving into self-publishing as well. So this year will actually be our year. We'll be launching our first anthology later this year, and a few other projects. So it's a really kind of great place to go, because a lot of people in this industry tend to work at home, which I did for about a decade of my career.
Right.
And so it's actually nice to go somewhere, as I say, to put on pants and engage the outside world, because working sometimes at home, you kind of tend to work in a vacuum after a while. Your social skills deteriorate, and you just end up venting and screaming on Twitter or the internet somewhere. Yeah. So it's actually nice to actually come in, and we're all friends. We all hang out, go to dinner, party, and just have a good time at the end of the day.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, so it's been great. I've been part of the studio now. I think this is my, I want to say 11th year, maybe, or 10th year. Yeah, maybe more actually, 12th year maybe, with the studio. And I kind of run the show now, just to making sure everybody has a roof over their head and pays their rent, so to speak. but it's been great. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I jumped the gun a little bit. I meant to ask earlier, so I'm going to go back to Jim Henson's Tale of Sand. Were you previously a fan of Jim Henson before working on that project?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I grew up. I mean, I was a heavy Muppets fan when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I had a lot of Muppets paraphernalia, like the books about them and the script book, actually, that I would often kind of read out as like, and do shows with, kind of thing. And I actually made a few of my own puppets early on.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wasn't that familiar with his like Dark Crystal
Sure.
and Labyrinth till much later when I was in high school. But definitely as a younger kid, it was The Muppet Show, Sesame Street, and that stuff that really kind of enchanted me. And then as I grew older, I kind of learned of his larger body of work. And then when I was actually approached by Archaea and introduced to the Henson archivist, Karen Falk, and she sent me a bunch of DVDs of a lot of his independent projects,
Right.
Like Timepiece and it was called The Cube.
Yeah, The Cube is my favorite film of all time.
Yeah,
I love it so much.
Yeah, it's a bizarre one, and like a lot of these short films he did just for fun and practice, like college things he did, like played with animation and something that like some of it's available on the Henson YouTube or Vimeo. I can't remember where they have it offhand, but it actually introduced me to this whole other side I was completely unaware of, and having knowing and written Tale of Sand just prior to or concurrently around the same time he was developing like Sesame Street and The Muppet Show. Interesting to see like him playing into different worlds, the world of the Muppets, and that sort of thing took off. His career kind of veered away from the more kind of art films of Tale of Sand and Timepiece, like and Cube for that matter, right? So it was interesting to learn, kind of see this the struggling artist, if you will, and see how kind of success can dictate your choices and your struggle and that sort of thing. So it was a really it was an honor to work on the project and work directly with his family and learn about him and visit the Henson lot and see like the puppets and all that great stuff. It was a truly, truly wonderful experience.
That's so cool. Yeah, Jim Henson, like I mentioned, is one of my biggest influences in life. So anything he does was like gold to me. And looking back on it all, I have such great nostalgic feelings. So anyone that loves Jim Henson is like, yeah, you get 10 extra bonus points in my book. Especially if you know what Cube is, because no one does. I say my favorite movie is Cube, and they're like, oh, that horror movie. And I'm like, no, what they took the idea from for that horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So jumping back to your work on Marvel, I saw that you'll be on Spider-Man Generations with Bendis, and I saw some really cool promo art for that, and I'm really excited for that project. I know that it's pretty early, so you might not be able to say anything, but is there anything you can tell us about that?
I really can't say anything.
Okay.
Other than that, basically Miles and Peter are both in the book.
Sure.
That's about as much as I can reveal, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, that's enough to sell me straight into it. So I love the work that you've done in the past on Spider-Man, on learning the crawl, that story, where you seem to lean pretty heavily into Steve Ditko's influence there with the art, which was so perfect for the story and the setting of that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I try to like morph and change it up a little bit every time I work on a different project. Really try to feel out the kind of energy I want to convey or the visuals. So yeah, with Learning to Cross this, we were obviously going back and kind of filling in the spaces between the gutters, if you will, for Peter's origin story, or kind of like how he became that kind of friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It was actually kind of a nice way to go back and pay homage to Ditko and his work, especially since we're directly riffing on a lot of scenes, or creating the scenes that happened before and after something Ditko had drawn himself. So it was a really great exploration and way to play with the art style as well, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's one of the next things I had written down was that I've noticed that you are really good at adjusting your style to a degree depending on what you're working on. And it just blows my mind that you can be so fluid in changing your style for what the story needs, which is just awesome to me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, sometimes I don't change it that much. I mean, I guess Nova would probably be the closest to my own personal style, if you will. But yeah, I usually try to push it and pull the style a little bit just to better reflect the story or the audience or the mood or whatever it might be. I mean, like I'm an artist, I like to explore things. I like to like change it up and mix medias and so on and so forth. So any opportunity that I can actually, take to do that is just adds another added level or a bonus to a series I'm working on.
Yeah.
And like Hawkeye was a great example of that regard. Like I had to like shift into 3 different styles and just like allow those styles to kind of encapsulate certain elements of the story.
Speaking of your own personal style, I saw that your creator-owned webcomic Kookaburra is supposed to be relaunching sometime this year. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is way back in 2007. I started, along with a few other guys in the studio, a web initiative called Transmission X. And we all kind of created comics, and they actually quite took off very well. I mean, the readership was great, and I had a large audience. But then, as with most things at the time, I was like, well, I'm not really making a lot of money on this, or actually zero money. So unfortunately, when paying work came in, my own personal projects suffered by going on the back burner, and when Tale of Sand kind of landed on my plate I started working on that book in 2011. And then just prior to that, I was doing some Marvel work, very small one shots and that sort of thing. So, I mean, my time really became monopolized with my Marvel work, and it was just kind of it seemed like a very natural area to kind of move into, really, at the end of the day. I mean, and unfortunately that got sidetracked. So that hadn't been updated, I think, since 2011. It was the last update, a few pages into the new year that year, or it might have been 2012 actually. No, actually, I think it was 2012. Mm-hmm. So it's a story I quite enjoyed doing. I had a great audience. I had about 150,000 people visiting on a monthly basis, and there was a clamor, and I still get questions at shows and conventions going, when are you bringing this back? And like I said earlier, and when we were chatting, it's like those are the stories that I enjoy telling the most because they're my stories. So yeah, it's definitely, I'm taking a moment after a lot of my obligations are done by early fall. I've been slowly working on things, but right now I'm still balancing contractual work and obligations to Marvel and other companies. So, but once those peter out, I'm hoping to kind of take a month or two off and just dive in wholeheartedly and actually wrap up the story, so I can actually give a complete picture of what I wanted to tell online, and then collect it into a book and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So and then I have other ideas for other things as well. So it's just like I like to try to balance out the two, because I do enjoy doing the corporate work, but I do enjoy doing the personal work as well, obviously. So over the past few years, the corporate has really taken the precedence, and like the pendulum really swung heavily in that direction. So I'm really just trying to balance it out now and kind of keep both going as effectively as I can.
I also saw that you're working on a Jane Eyre adaptation for Archaea coming out this fall.
Yeah, that's one of the other bigger projects. So while I was working on Nova, and actually back when I was finishing Hawkeye, I was also working on a 250-page graphic novel. So
wow. So
it's been, like I said, it's been a very busy year. So yes, I've been working with Aline Brosh McKenna, who is best known for the screenwriter on The Devil Wears Prada, and she's the showrunner on the TV series Crazy Ex-Girlfriend right now. And she kind of fell in love with the graphic novel medium years ago, as someone passed her along a few books, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is wonderful!" And once again, we had a mutual friend, and she'd been asking around about potentially doing something. He'd introduced her to a few other artists that she didn't really click with. Eventually, we got introduced, and this was just shortly after Tale of Sand, to be honest with you. It took years to develop the project. And yeah, we clicked, and we had a lot of similar likes and ideologies and kind of vision for the story. So yeah, she kind of had this idea. She wanted to adapt Jane Eyre into a modern day story, which has never been done before. I mean, it's a weird story. I mean, it's a dark gothic romance, but it's also weird. Like, you can't keep your crazy your crazy wife locked up in a tower in modern day New York. It's just not. It's not a thing that's allowed. So it was an interesting adaptation. So we really tried to make a unique story anyway. So it's definitely not your classic Jane Eyre, but it is a gothic romance set in modern New York and taking the flavor of the original text and kind of manipulating it to suit a modern day setting and audience kind of thing.
That's awesome. I'm excited to check that out.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Do you have any desire to work outside of comics and other mediums, like creating original stories for TV or movies or anything like that?
Oh, hells yeah. I mean, I've worked, like I said, I've worked in pretty much, you name it. I've worked in it in the arts. I've done the storyboarding. I've done graphic design. I've done advertising. I've created like characters and, brand identity for different things. And yeah, definitely. When I was younger, I used to play around with a lot of film and animation stuff. I've done some animation work. I just recently produced a short for Canada's 150th is this year, and I produced a small short along with Go Lucky Studios about Trudeau, our premier kind of thing. So it was like an animated short. So that was an interesting endeavor. But yeah, I'm always trying to push the envelope, because at the end of the day, I'm an artist, but I'm also a storyteller, and I think my storytelling skills precede my artistic skills. So it's if I can actually go and play in film, whether it's directing or designing, I mean, yeah, I definitely am not opposed to playing in other mediums. I mean, that's the joy of what I do.
Yeah.
It's like the art itself is the current outlet, but at the end of the day, it's the creativity behind that kind of takes you where you want to go, right? So
sure,
if I can tell a story in film or a painting or animation, yeah, I'm definitely up for it for sure.
Nice. So what inspires you? What do you go to re-energize your creative batteries when you're feeling drained?
Whoa, I don't think there's anything, one thing in specific. I mean, I tend to run on empty a lot, but I try to ingest as much as I can. And I mean, that goes in waves. Sometimes you're like, just don't have the time.
Right.
But whether it's like reading literature, I don't tend to read a lot of comics, to be honest with you. I tend to read a lot more in the book department, whether it's fiction or biographies, memoirs, historical texts, that sort of thing. Movies I love, whether it's, I'm a big kind of any genre of film, to be honest with you, whether it's current day, modern stuff or classic stuff. I mean, recently I got into a Buster Keaton kick, and I was like watching all his movies.
Buster Keaton's my favorite actor. So
yeah, like, he's amazing. Like the storytelling in his films is like astounding. Like, 'cause it's like, it's silent film with and he was one of the guys back then who uses as few cue cards or literary cards, whatever you called them, as compared to the other directors at the time. So I mean, yeah, I'll immerse myself. I tend to go down rabbit holes very often on the internet when I'm researching things. Whether it's like, I've had projects where I've taken me down old crime syndicates, for personal projects I've been working on, or I started looking into old fashion from like the 1920s, and I started buying catalogs from retail chains from that era. So I'm always trying, and then just disconnecting also is another big thing for me. I like to travel, so I like to just leave and go away for a month or two and explore a different country, see a different culture, try different foods, interact with different people, and then or even if it's just locally, just hop on my motorcycle and just ride away for a weekend and go camping with some buddies and talk stories and look at the stars. I mean, there's so many ways. I think I'm always watching people. I'm always watching things and picking up details around me. So it's a constant, I think, a good artist, I think, is like a sponge. They're always just picking up something from everywhere, whether it's, a radio in the background or a book they pick up and stuff like that. So I just try to fill myself up constantly with as many things and experiences as I can. And then hopefully that feeds whatever project. Sometimes it's a very aggressive or particular choice. Like I said, going down, like if I start researching something and I start going down rabbit holes and suddenly I'm like, researching, oh God, I can't even think of the things right now, but, underground tunnels in like Turkey or something like that, just like something you're like, wow, how did I get here? This is interesting. Let's make a story about this. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, so it's a pastime. Sometimes it takes the forefront, and zero work gets done as I'm re-energizing, which I know I will be doing soon because I'm kind of burnt out. But it all balances itself out at the end of the day, kind of.
Yeah. So in your career, you have already worked with some really awesome creators. Who are some dream collaborators that you would love to work with in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty spoiled, I'll be honest. For me, I guess it's more about the story. So I guess one of my favorites early on when I was younger was Neil Gaiman, whose body work I loved, whether it was his comic books like Sandman,
Yeah.
or his novels as well, kind of thing. So I mean, he'd be somebody I'd probably enjoy working with, and I'm just trying to think right now, but I'm so terrible with names sometimes. I tend to blank out. Trying to think of other people's. Actually, another. I'm blanking on his name right now. He's the criminal series.
Brubaker?
Ed Brubaker. Yeah. There's another guy whose work I've loved over the years. You know, Jonathan Hickman is another guy as well. So I mean, there's a lot of creators out there.
Sure.
I tend to just kind of go where the flow takes me, so to speak. So I'd be definitely up for a collaboration with a lot of these creators. I mean, and at the end of the day, I'm also looking forward to collaborating. I mean, my collaboration with Jeff Loveness was kind of great because it was a mutual collaboration in the sense that we both developed stories. So I think I think it's hard to step backwards once you move forward in that direction.
Yeah.
So I do hope should something happen in the future with another writer, something together on the ground floor, and bring both of our aesthetics together, if you will.
Awesome. Well, on that same kind of note, you've already worked with a bunch of comic characters that most of us would love to work on. I mean, the X-Men, Spider-Man. Are there any characters or titles that you haven't worked on yet that you would love to write for or do art for?
I'm a bit of a B-list character fan, or even C-list. So I've long proposed. It almost happened, but it kind of went in the direction I didn't want it to go. So I kind of stepped away from the project. But I would love to do, for example, a Starjammers space opera series.
Nice.
Just pure like the nostalgic Flash Gordon-esque, Star Wars-esque stories involving the characters. So that's something I've jokingly pitched to all my editors all the time at Marvel, and they're like, "No one wants to see this."
Oh no!
And then Guardians of the Galaxy happens, and I'm like, "Hey, that has a Trina raccoon in it."
Yeah.
But I think another character fan, a favorite of mine growing up was Moon Knight. So that would probably be one in the Marvel U that I'd love to get involved with.
Yeah.
And on the DC side of things, I've always loved Mr. Miracle and Big Barda and a lot of the new Gods, Kirby stuff. So I definitely would play in that world as well. Beyond that, I'm having a hard time thinking of anybody in particular.
Yeah. Well, I think your art would be perfect for the New Gods and Moon Knight. So, of course,
I'd love to do either of those.
Yeah, of course, Smallwood was just on Moon Knight, and his art was fantastic. And I think like yours and his art have similarities and just like that otherworldliness that you can bring to the table with it sometimes. Oh,
thanks, man. No, yeah, I loved his work on that. He's a fantastic artist.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and there's probably maybe a few other characters. Like, a nice reboot of Alpha Flight would be fun because just being Canadian and just going back to the core team, or or just taking some bizarre like weird character from the Marvel histories like Angar the Screamer or something, and making a series out of him or something like that. I don't know, because I find a lot of the thing I like about the B-list and C-list characters is that you're potentially allowed to do more with these characters. Whereas if you're working on like an X-Men book or Spider-Man, and which I've been lucky to do, but you're pretty much, they're the top tier characters. They're the parameters where you can push and pull are not as great kind of thing. So, when you take someone like, hey, let me take, Chad and Hepzibah from, Starjammers, and no one cares. You know what I mean? So you can just have fun with it and go nuts and actually potentially make them into interesting characters.
Yeah, definitely so.
So, yeah.
So creators often have a discerning eye for media. What are you really excited about right now that you can recommend to us and our listeners as far as music, film, books, or so on?
What have I been ingesting? Like I said, I've been quite busy of late, so I've been kind of in the shadows with a lot of stuff.
Sure.
I mean, TV-wise, I've been I just caught up on Sherlock. So that's
nice. I still
I thought it was a great series end. I mean, I'm not sure if the entire series is over, but like the last few episodes were fantastic. I just watched Flaked on Netflix as well. Book wise, I just picked up a bunch of old pulp classics. So that's probably nothing I can really recommend offhand. I tend to read a lot of crime fiction from the 40s and 50s.
Sure.
Film-wise, I just enjoyed Wonder Woman. I thought it was a great flick. What else? I'm looking forward to Baby Driver.
Yeah, that looks cool.
Yeah, so I mean, trying to think what else offhand. Also, Valerian. I'm a big Luc Besson fan, so I'm curious to see him come back to the fold. Like, I mean, he's done a couple of things here and there, but he kind of fell off the map for a long time.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
As a director, anyways. I mean, he was still producing stuff, but so I'm looking forward to those films as well. And there's probably a few other ones I'm completely blanking on. Let's see, comic wise, what am I reading now? I mean, I'm loving Outcasts from Image, and I just picked up what's it called, the Monday Murders? No.
Oh yeah, I think it
by
is.
Coker and.
Yeah, I think it is called Monday Murders, isn't it? Something like that, anyways.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, I love Tom Coker's artwork, and Hickman usually is a solid scriptwriter, so I'm curious. I'm looking forward to reading that one.
Black Monday Murders, that's it.
Oh, Black Monday Murders, yeah. Yeah, there you go. So, what else? I mean, offhand, I'm just kind of like, and music-wise, what did I download lately? I picked up the new Black Keys, which is a great album. Nice. Not Black Keys, it was a solo album from... what's his name? Auerbach? I can't remember his name. And also the XX. But I'm all over the place with that too. I tend to pick up like modern stuff, but also tend to pick up really old classic stuff as well. So
that's cool.
I'm all over the place. I like to just ingest and see what happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So is there anything else that you'd like to promote or talk about that we might have missed?
No, I think we covered a lot of bases. I mean, the stuff that's upcoming, if people are interested, in any of my personal projects or the studio projects, we have mailers that are starting to go out next month, and keeping abreast with behind the scenes stuff. We have some great stuff happening with the studio, and a lot of the guys are putting up their own projects as well. So we're really excited about that. And we can easily be found, all of us actually, at theraidstudio.com. It has links to all our personal sites as well as the studio as a whole. And my own stuff, I mean, it'll all be announced through the same channel. So if there people are interested, just follow me on any social media, but usually Instagram's the best. That's when I keep tabs on the most. And I'll usually announce upcoming projects and endeavors, whether it's Marvel, DC, or indie stuff.
Awesome. And what's your Instagram name?
Ramón Pérez. So
okay, just at Ramón Pérez.
If you can spell my name, then you're good.
All right. And we'll have links to that in the show notes. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Thank you.
Okay, and we're back. Time for recommendations. Emily, do you have a recommendation for us?
Yes, I recommend the entire run, but especially the most recent issues of Ms. Marvel. They're doing very interesting things with that comic right now, and it's a little difficult to read at times because it touches very, very close to what's going on around us. They
really are talking about a lot of political issues and just really where we are as a country, and a lot of the strife that's happening right now, all the stuff that you're seeing on the news. But they're doing it in such a way that it isn't just them pushing an agenda without actually telling a good story. They're doing both, which is, I think, the perfect way to do it, and something that Marvel's been known for. I've seen a lot of talk online about how people are like, SJWs are ruining Marvel, and it's like, this isn't what Marvel used to be. And you go back to like the 60s and 70s, and you see what like Kirby was doing, and you see what all these people were doing, and you're like, are you sure?
Yeah, that's why
read Marvel comics?
I'm so confused when people say that, and I'm just like, maybe it's because I'm, more new at this, but like I am aware of, decades of comics, and they're not, I don't know. They are pushing boundaries, and not necessarily, they're not pushing agendas, but they're being pretty frank.
Yeah, they're not afraid to speak up.
Yes.
in a lot of ways.
And Becky represents everything that I hate. Yeah, pretty much in Ms. Marvel. Yeah, she's awful. I want to punch her in the face.
Yeah, it's a little hard to read sometimes when there's a character you're just really like, oh, I don't like you. I don't like when you talk. I don't like when you're on the page. But
every time I just look at her, I'm like, and you look really stupid in your outfit.
Yeah, take that, Becky.
Yeah, Becky with the not good hair.
Well, my recommendation for this episode is something that we kind of already touched on a little bit. Unstoppable Wasp. Specifically issue 8, the final issue. That's the one that I really wanted to recommend, but I'll just go ahead and recommend the whole series. This series was just so wonderful. There's not really words for how good I think it was. And I'm really sad that it's over, which I know that like when Vision ended, Vision was always going to be the 8 issues that was the Tom King Vision. And I was like, man, I really wish this would continue, but I also like that it got wrapped up well because some comics don't.
Yeah.
Some comics live long enough to become horrible, and I'm glad that that never happened to Wasp, even though I am really sad that it ended with just 8 issues. It did go out on an absolutely fantastic note, though, and it may very well be my favorite comic of the year. It's so good, and there's lots of good comics this year. I've had an amazing year in comics. I think
It's been awesome.
So that's saying a lot. There's a lot of great things that happened in this last issue, but I don't want to spoil them, especially if I'm going to recommend the whole series to people who haven't read anything before the last issue. But let me just say that there's some really great moments. There was a couple moments that made me tear up, and that's not something I do. So yeah,
I do all
it's
the time.
fantastic.
I guess the best is yet to come then, since I've only read the first issue, and I was just squealing with delight over it. I mean, silently, because I don't actually squeal with delight. But I was taking notes, and I was just like, Nadia is delightful, and Bobby is old, which she said about 5 times, which made me laugh so much. I love Bobby Morris. I love Lady Adventure Scientist, which is what Nadia coins her and Bobby as being in the first issue.
Yeah, and then you get the stuff about real lady scientists in the back of the comics, which is really cool.
Lady scientists are the best.
They are. A lot better than those dude scientists.
That's true. Yeah, I know. They made a point about the list of like the smartest, I guess, people in the world. In the first issue, they were talking about it, and the first woman is in number 20, or isn't until number 27. And I was just like, "What the hell, man?"
Yeah, don't they make a note
until
that
Moon
it's
Girl?
Like, it's like men that made those lists.
Yeah, yeah, and then they start talking about Moon Girl and how she's actually the smartest, and I was like, "Yeah, she is."
Yeah,
I love her.
In the Marvel universe, Moon Girl is the smartest. I really hope they do more with that too, because they really put that out there, but they didn't do very much with it.
Oh, okay.
So I hope that they actually do more with her being the smartest, and that we get to see that in action a little bit more.
Yeah, I've only read the first volume of that, so
It's
with
fantastic.
everything, the best is always still to come for me.
I would say that the 3rd volume maybe of that is where it really picks up.
Okay.
The first volume or 2, she's kind of bratty. I think because she's young and she's trying to learn her way. So, and she does have a lot of bad things going on for her, like people don't take her seriously, and it's really hard. So when you're the smartest, you're bound to be a little bratty if people aren't taking you seriously.
That'd be hard. It's just like, no, I'm not just, an 8-year-old or 12. I don't know how old she is.
Yeah, I don't remember either. 8 to 12 is a good range, though. Somewhere in there.
It's just like, I know a lot of 8 to 12-year-olds, and it's just like, they're not that smart.
Right,
smart kids, but they're not Lunella.
Well, I think that's all I have. Emily, you have anything else? Any parting notes for our listeners?
Nope. I think I'm good.
All right. Well, where can we find you on Twitter or anywhere else that you want to be found? Interact with our listeners.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Saviem01. That's SAVIEM01.
And you can find me, as always, on Twitter at FleshEater, on Instagram at ReadBraveComics, and on Twitter with the podcast at Read_Brave. And that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you hopefully sometime in the future. I'm not making promises. Goodbye.
Bye.
This has been a Graphomania production. If you would like to hear more podcasts, go to graphocast.com, graphocast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Graphocast, and like the Graphomania page on Facebook for news and updates.